Dr. Marcus Blackwood pressed his gloved hand against the ancient stone wall, feeling the subtle vibrations that had drawn him to this forgotten moon, orbiting the gas giant Kepler 442b. The crystalline formations jutting from the cavern walls caught the light from his helmet's illumination system, casting prismatic rainbows across hieroglyphs that shouldn't exist according to everything the Galactic Council believed about this region of space. "Marcus, your vitals are elevated again," came the melodic voice of Commander Lyra Voss through his comm system. Her tone carried that particular mix of concern and exasperation that had become familiar over their 3 years of working together. "The atmospheric readings are stable, but I'm detecting some unusual energy signatures from your location." Marcus stepped back from the wall, his breath fogging the interior of his environmental suit as excitement coursed through him. The Zephyrian research vessel Harmony's edge hung in orbit above, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with the gentle rhythms that marked all Zephyrian technology. Commander Voss and her crew had been patient with his archaeological expeditions, even when they led to seemingly barren moons like this one. "Lyra, you need to see this," Marcus transmitted, his voice barely containing his excitement. "I'm sending you images now, but they don't do justice to what I'm looking at down here." The hieroglyphs covered every surface of the cavern, telling a story that made Marcus's academic training rebel against what his eyes were showing him. Ships the size of moons, fleets that numbered in the millions, star maps that showed trade routes spanning half the galaxy. And at the center of it all, repeated again and again in various artistic styles, was a symbol that made his heart race. A blue marble suspended in the darkness of space, surrounded by what could only be interpreted as protective vessels. Earth. These ancient carvings were depicting Earth as the center of a vast galactic civilization. "Marcus, these images." Lyra's voice carried a note of confusion through the comm. "The dating you're showing suggests these carvings are over 3,000 years old, but that's impossible. Your species only achieved interstellar flight 52 years ago." Marcus ran his hands along another section of wall, where the hieroglyphs seemed to tell a darker story. Ships fleeing, stars going dark, and something else, geometric patterns that seemed to writhe and move even when carved in stone, suggesting an enemy that consumed rather than conquered. "Commander, I need extraction equipment down here. There's a sealed chamber behind this wall, and I think—" Marcus's words were cut off as his proximity sensors screamed a warning. The wall he'd been examining was moving, ancient mechanisms responding to his presence after millennia of dormancy. The stone slid away with surprising smoothness, revealing a chamber that took Marcus's breath away. Data crystals the size of his torso lined the walls, their surfaces etched with the same writing he'd seen throughout the caverns. But it was the center of the room that made him stagger backwards in shock. A holographic projection system, still functional after thousands of years, activated as he entered. The chamber filled with three-dimensional star maps, tactical displays, and most impossibly of all, what appeared to be personnel records. Faces that were unmistakably human stared back at him from the glowing displays, wearing uniforms that bore the same symbol he'd seen throughout the carvings. By the void, Marcus whispered, his scientific skepticism crumbling as he watched fleet movements play out in the holographic display. Thousands of ships, each one bearing the marking of something called the Terran Federation, moving in coordinated patterns that spoke of military precision beyond anything the current galactic civilization had achieved. Marcus, your biometrics are off the charts. Lyra's voice carried real concern now. What's happening down there? Marcus forced himself to focus, to document what he was seeing even as his mind reeled with the implications. Lyra, I need you to contact the Zephyrian Archaeological Council immediately. And I need a secure channel to Earth. What I'm looking at down here is going to change everything we thought we knew about human history. The holographic display shifted, showing what appeared to be a final message. A human figure in an elaborate uniform stood at what might have been a command center, speaking in a language that Marcus's translation software identified as an archaic form of Standard Terran. The translation scrolled across his visor as the figure spoke. To those who come after, know that we do not flee in defeat but retreat in wisdom. The Devourers have shown us the futility of direct confrontation. We go now into the long silence, but we do not go into extinction. When the galaxy has forgotten us, when we are nothing but legends and myths, then we will be safe to rebuild. The Watchers will remain. The Guardians will prepare. And when the Devourers return, for they will return, we will be ready. The message concluded with star coordinates and what appeared to be activation codes. Marcus stared at the display, his hands shaking as he recorded everything. This wasn't just archaeological evidence. It was a message meant for someone exactly like him, a human who would find these ruins and understand their significance. Hours later, aboard the Harmony's Edge, Marcus sat in the ship's council chamber facing the assembled Zephyrian research team. Commander Voss's usual composure was strained as she reviewed the data he'd transmitted, her crystalline features reflecting the soft bioluminescence of her people's technology. The other Zephyrians, Dr. Kane Thornfield, their xenolinguist, and Chief Engineer Blake Riverside, exchanged glances that Marcus was beginning to recognize as diplomatic concern. "Marcus, my friend," Commander Voss began, her melodic voice carrying a tone he'd never heard before. "What you're proposing is difficult to accept. The historical records are quite clear about humanity's recent emergence into galactic society. Your species was discovered by our survey teams barely 6 decades ago, living on a single world with primitive chemical rockets." Dr. Thornfield leaned forward, his elongated fingers dancing over a holographic display. "The linguistic analysis is fascinating, certainly. The language patterns match archaic Terran dialects, and the technological concepts described in these recordings are surprisingly sophisticated. But the timeline simply doesn't align with known history." "Known history according to whom?" Marcus challenged, feeling frustration build in his chest. "Lyra, you've worked with me for 3 years. Have I ever presented you with false data? Have I ever made claims I couldn't support?" Commander Voss's expression softened, and she reached across the table to place one of her 6-fingered hands over his. "Marcus, we don't question your integrity, but consider what you're asking us to believe. These recordings suggest that humans once commanded fleets that dwarfed our entire galactic defense force. They describe technology that we've never encountered, trade networks that supposedly span sectors we've never explored. And most disturbing of all, they reference an enemy that consumed entire star systems. Chief Engineer Riverside spoke up for the first time, his voice carrying the mechanical precision typical of his specialization. The energy patterns in those crystals are unlike anything in our databases. The quantum resonance suggests technology at least a millennium more advanced than our current capabilities. If humans possessed such technology, where did it go? How did an entire galactic civilization simply vanish? Marcus stood, packing to the chamber's viewing port where the ruins-covered moon hung against the star field. That's exactly what I'm trying to understand. But I can't do it alone, and I can't do it if you refuse to take these findings seriously. The chamber fell silent except for the gentle humming of the ship's biosystems. Finally, Commander Voss spoke again. Marcus, we will submit your findings to the Archaeological Council as protocol demands. But I must warn you, the political implications of what you're suggesting are significant. The Zephyrian Coalition has spent centuries establishing our role as guardians of galactic peace. The other member species of the Council look to us for leadership precisely because we represent stability and continuity. And if what I've found is true, Marcus asked, turning back to face them, if humans didn't just recently stumble into space, but were once the dominant force in this galaxy, what does that mean for your coalition? Dr. Thornfield exchanged another glance with Commander Voss before answering. It would mean that everything we've built our civilization on, our understanding of galactic history, our position as elder species, our responsibility to guide younger races, all of it would be called into question. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. You're not planning to suppress this, are you? We're planning to be careful, Commander Voss replied firmly. Marcus, if even half of what these recordings suggest is true, then there are forces at work in this galaxy that we don't understand. The references to these devourers, the suggestion that an entire civilization went into hiding rather than face them directly. We cannot afford to act rashly. That night, alone in his quarters aboard the Harmony's Edge, Marcus composed a message on his personal communication array. The message was addressed to Dr. Elena Rodriguez at the Terran Archaeological Institute on Earth, but he included routing instructions that would ensure copies reached several other institutions he'd worked with over the years. As he typed, he found himself glancing repeatedly at the sealed data crystals he'd been allowed to bring aboard. The Zephyrians had scanned them thoroughly, but hadn't objected to his keeping them for further study. What they didn't know was that the crystals had begun exhibiting unusual properties since leaving the ruins, subtle energy fluctuations that seemed almost like a heartbeat. Elena, he wrote, I'm attaching findings that are going to sound impossible, but I need you to trust me. I've discovered evidence that suggests human civilization is far older than we believed, and that our current understanding of our place in the galaxy may be completely wrong. More importantly, I've found warnings about something called the Devourers, an enemy that our apparent ancestors faced and chose to hide from rather than fight directly. He paused, considering his next words carefully. I'm sending you coordinates and what appear to be activation codes. I don't know what they're for, but the recordings suggest they're meant for humans who would understand their significance. Alina, if what I've found is true, then everything we think we know about ourselves is a lie. And if the warnings in these recordings are accurate, then that lie might be the only thing standing between us and extinction. Marcus encrypted the message with protocols that would ensure it reached Earth through civilian channels, bypassing the official diplomatic communications that the Zephyrians might monitor. As the transmission began its journey across space, he settled back in his chair and picked up one of the data crystals. In the dim light of his quarters, the crystal seemed to pulse with its own inner light, and for just a moment, Marcus could have sworn he heard something, a distant whisper of voices, speaking in languages he almost recognized, telling stories of glory and sacrifice and a promise that guardians would always remain. Outside his porthole, the stars looked different somehow, as if they were watching and waiting for something that had been set in motion long ago. 23 days after Marcus Blackwood's transmission left Zephyrian space, it arrived at Earth through a series of civilian relay stations, eventually finding its way to the offices of the Terran Archaeological Institute in Geneva. Dr. Alina Rodriguez had been expecting it. Not because she was psychic, and not because she'd been monitoring Marcus's work, though she had been, more closely than he knew. Alina had been expecting a message like this her entire career, because she was one of the few people on Earth who knew that humanity's first steps into space hadn't been first steps at all. They had been return steps. Alina stood in the center of what appeared to be a standard archaeological research facility, but her security clearance badge granted her access to areas that didn't appear on any official building schematics. She descended through 3 levels of concealed elevators, past biometric scanners and quantum encryption locks, until she reached a chamber that officially didn't exist. The Terran Heritage Command Center stretched out before her like something from humanity's most ambitious science fiction. Holographic displays showed real-time positions of ships that weren't supposed to exist, monitoring bases that appeared on no public star charts, and tracking personnel who were listed in public records as merchants, researchers, and colonial administrators. Admiral Thompson, Alina called out as she approached the Central Command platform. "We have confirmation." Admiral Jake Thompson turned from a display showing fleet positions throughout human space. He was a tall man whose weathered features spoke of decades spent in deep space, though his official records listed him as a retired freight captain. The Blackwood transmission. It arrived intact, and the quantum authentication confirms it's genuine, Alina replied, handing him a data pad. Marcus found exactly what we've been waiting for, proof that the sleeper protocol worked. More importantly, he's found evidence that the Devourers may be stirring again. Admiral Thompson studied the data with an expression that mixed satisfaction with grim concern. Around them, the Heritage Command Center hummed with activity as dozens of technicians monitored communications and coordinated operations across multiple star systems. To the outside world, these men and women were civilian contractors working on deep space logistics. In reality, they were the nerve center of humanity's greatest deception. Dr. Mitchell, Admiral Thompson called out to a younger man working at a nearby station. "What's the status on our monitoring networks?" Dr. Ryan Mitchell looked up from his displays, his eyes bright with excitement and worry. "Sir, we've been tracking unusual energy signatures at the galactic rim for the past 6 months. The patterns match historical data from the archives. If Blackwood's warnings are accurate, we may have less time than we hoped." Elena moved to her own command station, her fingers dancing over holographic controls that activated communication protocols unused for decades. "Then it's time to begin the awakening. Admiral, do I have your authorization to activate Prometheus Protocol?" Admiral Thompson stood silent for a long moment, the weight of 3,000 years of human history pressing down on his shoulders. Around him, the command center had gone quiet as dozens of personnel waited for the order that would change everything. "The Heritage Council authorized full activation in the event of confirmed Devourer activity," he said finally. "Dr. Rodriguez, begin Prometheus Protocol. It's time to wake up the Federation." Elena's hands moved across her controls with practiced precision, sending coded signals to relay stations throughout human space. The messages were brief and would appear meaningless to anyone intercepting them. Routine maintenance schedules, supply deliveries, personnel transfers. But to those who knew how to read them, they carried a single, world-changing command. The long silence is ending. On the frontier world of New Montana, colonist Rebecca Hayes received what appeared to be a routine message about her brother's wedding anniversary. She read it twice, then walked to her barn and activated a hidden panel beneath the hay storage. The barn's floor slid away, revealing a command center that had been maintained in perfect readiness for 53 years. Within an hour, New Montana's agricultural collective had revealed itself as Advanced Fleet Base Prometheus, its disguised orbital platforms powering up weapons systems that could level mountains. Similar scenes played out across human space. The research station at Wolf 359 shed its camouflage to reveal itself as a massive shipyard, its construction bays containing vessels whose capabilities dwarfed anything in the public fleet. Mining operations in the asteroid belt suddenly began broadcasting military identification codes as their facilities transformed from ore processing plants into fortress bases. On Mars, beneath the tourist attractions and university campuses, ancient tunnels carved during humanity's first expansion into space hummed with renewed purpose. Dr. Sarah Chen, officially the director of the Martian Colonial Museum, walked through corridors lined with stasis pods containing technology that had been deemed too dangerous for public knowledge. "Begin revival sequence for all Titan-class vessels," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had trained her entire life for this moment. "And send word to the sleeper cells in Zephyrian space. It's time for Marcus Blackwood to learn who he really is." Meanwhile, aboard the Harmony's Edge, Marcus was beginning to suspect that his situation had changed dramatically. Commander Voss had been avoiding him for 3 days, ever since his data crystals had begun exhibiting what the Zephyrian engineers called impossible energy fluctuations. The ship's course had also changed. Instead of returning to Zephyrian home space, they were heading toward a system Marcus didn't recognize. "Commander," Marcus said as he found Lyra on the ship's observation deck, "I think we need to talk." Lyra turned to face him, and Marcus was surprised to see something that looked almost like fear in her crystalline features. "Marcus, the Archaeological Council has reviewed your findings. They've made certain decisions about how to proceed." "What kind of decisions?" "You're to be transferred to a research facility for extended debriefing. Your findings will be classified until further notice, and Earth will be informed that you've chosen to extend your exchange program indefinitely." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "You're talking about imprisonment." "We're talking about protection," Lyra replied, but her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "Marcus, do you have any idea what kind of panic your discoveries could cause, if even half of what those recordings suggest is true?" Her words were cut off as the ship's alarm systems activated. Emergency lighting bathed the observation deck in red as the Harmony's edge shuddered around them. "All crew to emergency stations," came the voice of Chief Engineer Riverside over the ship's communication system. "We have multiple contacts approaching at impossible velocities." Marcus and Lyra rushed to the nearest observation port, where they saw something that defied everything they thought they knew about human technology. Ships were emerging from faster-than-light travel around them. Dozens of vessels whose sleek, predatory lines spoke of capabilities far beyond anything in the public human fleet. The largest of the ships, a massive dreadnought whose hull bore symbols that matched those in Marcus's discoveries, broadcast a communication request. The voice that came through the Harmony's Edge's communication system was crisp, professional, and unmistakably human. "Zephyrian vessel Harmony's Edge. This is Captain Sarah Henderson of the Terran Federation ship Retribution. We're here to collect Dr. Marcus Blackwood and escort your vessel to Federation space for diplomatic discussions." Commander Voss stared at the display showing the human fleet, her usual composure completely shattered. "This is impossible. Your species doesn't have ships like these. You don't have the technology, you don't have the resources." "Commander," Marcus interrupted, his own voice filled with wonder and growing understanding, "I don't think we ever lost them. I think we just learned how to hide." Captain Henderson's voice continued over the communication channel. "Commander Voss, Dr. Blackwood's research has triggered protocols that have been dormant for 3 millennia. The Terran Federation has been very patient with the galaxies. Misconceptions about our capabilities, but recent developments require us to be more direct about our true nature." Another voice joined the transmission, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, speaking from Earth with an authority that Marcus had never heard in her tone before. "Marcus, this is Elena. I'm sorry we couldn't tell you everything before, but your security clearance wasn't high enough. What you found on that moon was meant to be found by someone like you, someone with the right genetic markers and archaeological training to recognize the significance. Genetic markers, Marcus asked, his mind reeling. The Federation didn't just hide ships and bases, Marcus. We hid people, sleeper agents, their descendants carrying on the mission without fully understanding what they were preparing for. Every human in the archaeological field, every human in deep space exploration, we've all been guided by instincts we didn't fully understand. On the bridge of the Harmony's edge, the crew watched in stunned silence as more human ships continued to arrive. Not the crude, industrial vessels they were familiar with, but warships whose design spoke of engineering principles that made Zephyrian technology look primitive. "How long?" Commander Voss asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you been deceiving us?" Captain Henderson's reply carried 3,000 years of patient planning. "Commander, we haven't been deceiving you. We've been protecting you. The galaxy wasn't ready for the truth about humanity, and more importantly, we weren't ready to reveal ourselves. But the devourers are stirring again, and the time for hiding is over." Marcus stared out at the human fleet, understanding flooding through him like a dam bursting. Every instinct that had driven him to archaeological sites, every fascination with ancient civilizations, every seemingly random choice that had led him to that moon, it had all been genetic programming, a heritage written into his DNA by ancestors who had planned for this exact moment. "Elena," he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was learning, "what happens now?" "Now, Marcus, you help us convince the galaxy that legends sometimes return when they're needed most. Because according to our deep space monitoring stations, the devourers will be here within 72 hours. The Galactic Council chamber on Zephyria Prime had never witnessed a session quite like this one. Representatives from 27 species sat in their crystalline amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of concern as they processed the impossible reports flowing in from across the galaxy. High Arbiter Zane Christhaven called for order with the harmonic tones that marked formal Zephyrian authority, but even his usually commanding presence seemed diminished by the scope of what they were discussing. The holographic displays surrounding the chamber showed real-time feeds from across civilized space, each one confirming what should have been impossible. Human colonies, settlements that the Galactic Council had classified as struggling frontier communities, were revealing themselves as massive military installations. Trading posts were shedding camouflage to expose shipyards that dwarfed the combined industrial capacity of the three largest Council member species. And most disturbing of all, the humans were doing it openly, broadcasting their capabilities across all communication channels, as if they no longer cared who knew their secrets. "The reports cannot be accurate," declared Ambassador Quinn Silverstone of the Altarian Trade Consortium, her tentacled form writhing with agitation. "The human species lacks the infrastructure for such deception. We have detailed surveys of every human-controlled system." "Apparently, those surveys were less detailed than we believed," replied Dr. Kane Thornfield, who had arrived that morning with Commander Voss and full documentation of Marcus Blackwood's discoveries. The archaeological evidence is undeniable. The humans have been systematically concealing their true capabilities for over half a century. High Arbiter Christhaven studied the tactical displays with growing unease. Commander Voss, your report suggests that Dr. Blackwood's discoveries were somehow expected by human authorities, that they had been preparing for such revelations. Commander Voss stood to address the chamber, her usual diplomatic composure strained by the events of the past week. Honored Arbiter, what we witnessed suggests careful, long-term planning on a scale that defies comprehension. The human fleet that intercepted us displayed coordination and technological sophistication that implies decades, perhaps centuries of preparation. The chamber's central holographic display shifted to show new incoming data. Fleet movements throughout human space were accelerating, with ships emerging from concealment throughout the outer rim territories. The vessels bore markings that matched the ancient symbols Marcus had found, and their energy signatures were unlike anything in the Council's databases. "They're not even trying to hide anymore," observed General Blake Riverside of the Andromedan Defense Force, his mechanical voice carrying notes of professional admiration. "Look at these formations. Perfect tactical positioning, advanced sensor arrays, weapons platforms that make our best warships look like patrol craft." Ambassador Tyler Morgan of the Centauri Republic leaned forward in his hoverchair, his cybernetic implants flickering as he processed the incoming data. "The question is not whether they've been hiding their capabilities. The question is why they're revealing them now." As if summoned by his words, the chamber's communication array activated with an incoming transmission request. The source identification made every representative freeze. It was coming from the Terran Federation ship Retribution, broadcasting from a position that should have been impossible to reach undetected, directly outside Zephyria Prime's orbital defense perimeter. High Arbiter Christhaven exchanged glances with his senior advisors before accepting the transmission. The holographic display filled with the image of a human woman whose bearing spoke of absolute authority. Her uniform was unmistakably military, but the insignia she wore matched nothing in the Council's databases. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," Dr. Elena Rodriguez began, her voice carrying across the chamber with diplomatic precision. "I am Dr. Elena Rodriguez, speaking on behalf of the Terran Federation. I apologize for the unconventional nature of this contact, but recent developments require us to dispense with certain protocols we have maintained for the past 3 millennia. The chamber erupted in confused voices as translators struggled to process the implications of her words. 3 millennia. The time frame matched Marcus Blackwood's archaeological findings exactly. "You claim to represent a Terran Federation that our historical records show never existed," High Arbiter Christhaven replied, his harmonic tones carrying barely contained skepticism. "The human species achieved interstellar flight barely 6 decades ago." Dr. Rodriguez smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both diplomatic and predatory. "Honored Arbiter, with respect, your historical records are incomplete by design. The Terran Federation never ceased to exist. We simply chose to let the galaxy believe we had vanished. It was a strategic decision made in the face of a threat that your civilization has never encountered. She gestured, and the display shifted to show star maps that made several council members gasp in recognition. Trade routes, defense installations, and population centers spanning sectors that the council had believed were largely unexplored, all marked with Terran Federation symbols. For the past 3,000 years, we have maintained a careful fiction. Every human your species encountered was part of an elaborate intelligence network. Every struggling colony was a disguised military base. Every merchant vessel was a reconnaissance ship. We have been watching, learning, and preparing while allowing you to believe you were the galaxy's natural leaders. Commander Voss spoke from her position in the chamber. Preparing for what? The display changed again, showing sensor readings that made the chamber fall silent. Massive energy signatures at the galaxy's edge, moving in patterns that spoke of vast, coordinated fleets approaching from intergalactic space. The Devourers, Dr. Rodriguez replied simply. An artificial intelligence that consumes organic civilizations for resources and knowledge. They attacked our original Federation 3 millennia ago, and we learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes the only way to win a war is to convince your enemy that there's nothing left worth fighting for. General Riverside's mechanical voice cut through the stunned silence. You're claiming that humanity voluntarily appeared to destroy itself to avoid a greater threat. We're claiming that humanity chose strategic withdrawal over extinction, Elena replied. The Devourers are drawn to large-scale technological civilizations. By fragmenting our obvious presence and allowing other species to take prominent roles in galactic affairs, we created a situation where the galaxy appeared to have regressed technologically since our supposed fall. Ambassador Silverstone's tentacles writhed with agitation. And now, why reveal yourselves now? Dr. Rodriguez's expression grew grim. Because our deep space monitoring stations have detected Devourer scout ships re-entering our galaxy. They've finally found us again, and the time for hiding is over. The chamber's displays suddenly filled with new data, long-range sensor readings showing geometric ships of massive size approaching from beyond the galactic rim. The energy signatures were unlike anything in the Council's databases, but they matched perfectly with the warnings in Marcus Blackwood's archaeological discoveries. How long do we have? High Arbiter Christhaven asked, his diplomatic protocols finally giving way to the reality of the situation. 72 hours until the first wave reaches Council space, Elena replied. The full Devourer fleet will arrive within 2 weeks. Honored Council members, I'm here to offer you a choice that my predecessors never had. The chance to unite against a common enemy with full knowledge of what we're facing. The chamber buzzed with panicked communications as representatives consulted with their governments. The political implications were staggering. Everything they had built their civilization on was suddenly revealed to be a carefully maintained illusion. Ambassador Morgan spoke first. Assuming we accept your claims, what exactly are you proposing? Elena gestured again, and the display showed detailed tactical assessments of devourer capabilities, alongside comparative analyses of current galactic defenses. The numbers were sobering. Without Federation support, the galaxy's combined fleets would last perhaps hours against a full devourer assault. "We're proposing a true alliance," Alina said. "Not the cultural exchange programs and trade agreements you're familiar with, but a complete integration of military and technological resources. The Federation has spent 3 millennia preparing for this war, but we cannot fight it alone." "And if we refuse?" asked Ambassador Silverstone. Alina's expression remained diplomatically neutral, but her words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Then you will face extinction, just as we would have 3,000 years ago. The Devourers don't negotiate, they don't retreat, and they don't show mercy. They consume civilizations the way a fire consumes dry wood." High Arbiter Christhaven stood, his crystalline form catching the chamber's bioluminescent lighting as he addressed Alina directly. "Dr. Rodriguez, you're asking us to accept that everything we've built our society on is a lie, that the humans we've patronized and guided for decades have actually been manipulating us." "No, honored arbiter," Alina replied gently. "I'm asking you to accept that everything you've built your society on is exactly what we hoped you would build. The Zephyrian Coalition's commitment to peace, the Altarian trade networks, the Andromedan defense protocols, all of it has made the galaxy stronger and more unified than it was during our original Federation." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "We didn't manipulate you into becoming something you weren't. We simply encouraged you to become the best version of what you already were. And now, we need that strength to face an enemy that nearly destroyed us when we stood alone." The chamber fell silent as the representatives processed the implications. Outside, through the great viewing ports, they could see ships, human ships bearing Federation markings, taking positions around Zephyria Prime, not as invaders but as protectors preparing for a war that was already on its way. Finally, Commander Voss spoke from her position near the archaeological display. "Marcus Blackwood, where is he now?" Alina smiled, and for the first time there was genuine warmth in her expression. "Dr. Blackwood is currently aboard the Federation research vessel Discovery, helping us analyze the archaeological sites his instincts led him to find. It turns out that genetic memory is a powerful thing. The descendants of Federation citizens have been unconsciously seeking out hidden caches of information for generations." "And what did he say when you told him the truth?" Voss asked. "He said it explained why he'd never felt like he belonged in the galaxy he thought he knew," Alina replied. "Marcus Blackwood has spent his entire career searching for something he couldn't name. Now he knows what it was. He was searching for home." High Arbiter Christhaven looked around the chamber at his fellow council members, seeing in their faces the same mixture of fear, awe, and desperate hope that he felt himself. "Dr. Rodriguez, if we agree to this alliance, what guarantee do we have that humanity won't simply resume its dominance over galactic civilization?" Alina's reply carried the weight of 3,000 years of careful planning and sacrifice. "Because, honored arbiter, We learned something during the long silence that we never understood during our original empire. True strength isn't about dominance. It's about knowing when to lead and when to follow. The galaxy is stronger with multiple voices guiding it, and we have no intention of silencing those voices. She gestured to the displays showing the approaching Devourer fleet. But right now, the only voice that matters is the one that can keep us all alive. And that voice is telling us that we have less than 3 days to prepare for the fight of our lives. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. 27 species, setting aside millennia of established order, chose to trust in legends that had suddenly become very real. Outside the chamber, the first Devourer scouts had already entered the galaxy's outer rim, their geometric hulls beginning the systematic consumption of everything in their path. Marcus Blackwood stood on the bridge of the Federation research vessel Discovery, watching through reinforced viewing ports as the largest fleet in galactic history assembled around the Kepler 442 system. Ships from 27 different species hung in formation with vessels bearing the Terran Federation emblem, their combined firepower representing the unity that Elena Rodriguez had spent days negotiating. The irony wasn't lost on him that they were making their stand in the same system where he had discovered the truth about humanity's past. The ancient moon where he had found the warnings about the Devourers now served as the archaeological command center for the Federation's strategic operations. Dr. Blackwood called Captain Maria Santos from the Discovery's command station. We're receiving the final tactical briefings from Admiral Thompson. The Devourer main fleet will arrive in approximately 6 hours. Marcus turned from the viewing port to study the holographic displays that filled the ship's command center. The past 72 hours had transformed him from a field archaeologist into something he'd never expected to become, a strategic consultant whose discoveries were guiding military decisions on a galactic scale. "Any changes to their approach vector?" he asked, moving to his assigned station where archaeological data from dozens of sites was being correlated with tactical projections. "None," replied Dr. Ryan Mitchell, who had been transferred from the Heritage Command Center to coordinate archaeological intelligence. "They're following the same patterns described in the ancient warnings. The Devourers appear to be as predictable as they are deadly." The main display shifted to show the enemy fleet, thousands of geometric ships that seemed to bend light around them, creating distortions that made accurate counting impossible. The Devourer vessels moved in perfect coordination, their formation suggesting a collective intelligence that treated the entire fleet as a single organism. "Federation command to all vessels," came Admiral Thompson's voice over the communication network. "We are receiving surrender demands from the Devourer Collective. They're offering to preserve a small percentage of each species for study purposes in exchange for unconditional capitulation." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he listened to the Devourer.